There is something nobody really explains clearly when it comes to love and attraction. It is not about being prettier. It is not about texting faster. It is not about doing more. In fact, it is the opposite. Sometimes the moment you stop caring so much, everything changes. And I don't mean you become cold. I don't mean you act rude. I mean something deeper, something quiet, something powerful. The moment you stop chasing someone who is not meeting you halfway, you begin to notice a strange shift. They start paying attention. They start wondering. They start coming closer. But why does this happen? Let's slow down and understand it properly. Because if you've ever felt like you were giving too much in a connection and getting too little back, then this message is for you. Most people don't notice when a connection becomes one-sided. It doesn't happen all at once. It starts small. You send the first message. You wait. You check your phone. You tell yourself, maybe he is busy. So you wait again. Then you send another message. Then another. And slowly, without realizing it, your peace starts depending on someone else's response. That is where the shift begins. Because now, it is not about connection anymore. It becomes about approval. And the moment someone feels they have your attention no matter what they do, they start relaxing. Too much. Attraction is not only about closeness. It is also about space. When someone feels they can have you anytime, without effort, without risk, without loss, they stop valuing the moment. Not because you are not valuable, but because availability without balance removes curiosity. And curiosity is what keeps interest alive. Think about it. Have you ever noticed how someone becomes more interesting when they are not always reachable? Not because they changed, but because your mind starts filling in the gaps. That is human nature. We value what feels slightly uncertain. There comes a point where something inside you gets tired. Tired of overthinking, tired of waiting, tired of reading meaning into small actions. And so you pull back. Not as a game, not as revenge, but as peace. You stop checking your phone every minute. You stop rewriting messages 10 times. You stop asking, why didn't he reply? And something interesting begins to happen. You breathe again. You sleep better. You feel lighter. And in that space, your energy changes. He notices it before you even say anything. You reply slower. You are less available. You are not chasing like before. And suddenly, he feels something unfamiliar. Not anger, not clarity, but curiosity. Why is she different now? And that question is powerful because it forces attention, and attention is the first step back into attraction. But here's where most people misunderstand it. This is not about playing games. It's not about pretending to be busy. It is not about ignoring someone to get a reaction. That never lasts. What actually works is something deeper. It is when your emotional center returns back to you, when your happiness is no longer sitting in someone else's inbox, when your peace is not waiting for a notification. That is what creates the real shift. Not distance, but independence. People don't lose interest in those who care. They lose interest in those who overgive without balance. Because when everything is always available, nothing feels earned. And when nothing feels earned, nothing feels deeply valued. Think about your own life for a second. Have you ever been more interested in someone who didn't give you everything instantly, who didn't reply immediately, who had their own life, their own space, their own rhythm? You probably remember them more clearly, not because they tried harder, but because they weren't always there. That is how the mind works. So when we say the power of not caring, we are not talking about becoming cold. We are talking about becoming centered again. Because the moment you stop over-caring about someone who is not meeting you halfway, you stop losing yourself in the process. And ironically, that is often the moment they start noticing you more. But what happens next is even deeper, because this is where confusion begins, and confusion is where emotions grow strongest. In the next part, we will go deeper into why people come back when you pull away, the psychology of silence, and what actually happens in his mind when you stop chasing. There is a moment that happens in many relationships, a moment that often goes unnoticed. Nothing dramatic happens. No big argument. No final goodbye. No emotional speech. Just silence. And strangely enough, that silence often says more than 1,000 conversations ever could. Because when you've spent weeks, months, or even years constantly explaining yourself, constantly reaching out, constantly trying to hold everything together, people get used to hearing your voice.
They get used to your effort. They get used to your presence. And when that presence suddenly becomes quieter, they notice. Not always immediately, not always the same day, but eventually, they notice. Imagine a person who calls every day, texts every morning, checks in every night, always reaches out first, always keeps the conversation alive, always fixes every awkward moment. At first, that effort feels sweet, thoughtful, loving, but over time something dangerous can happen. The relationship starts running on only one person's energy, and when one person becomes responsible for carrying the entire connection, the other person often stops carrying their share. Not because they are evil, not because they plan to, but because humans naturally adapt. People adjust to whatever becomes normal, and if your effort becomes normal, your absence becomes noticeable. When you constantly chase answers, you remove mystery. Every concern gets explained. Every emotion gets expressed. Every thought gets shared. Nothing is left unsaid. But when you step back, questions begin to appear. Questions like, why hasn't she texted? What is she doing? Is she okay? Has she moved on? Why doesn't she seem affected anymore? And once those questions start, attention follows. Because the human mind naturally focuses on unfinished stories. We think about what we don't understand. We think about what feels unresolved. We think about what suddenly changed. And your silence becomes that change. One of the most powerful things silence does is reveal the truth. When you stop forcing conversations, you discover who actually wants to talk. When you stop initiating, you discover who actually misses you. When you stop carrying the relationship, you discover who is willing to help carry it. This is why silence can feel uncomfortable, because it removes illusion. No more guessing, no more convincing yourself, no more making excuses, just reality. And reality often speaks very clearly. Now here's where people get it wrong. They hear advice about silence, and they turn it into a strategy, a game, a performance. They think, I'm going to ignore him for 3 days. I'm going to make him jealous. I'm going to disappear so he chases me. But forced silence feels different. People can often sense when someone is playing a game. Real silence doesn't come from manipulation. It comes from acceptance. It comes from reaching a point where your peace matters more than forcing someone's attention. That energy is completely different, and people feel the difference. Let's talk about something most people never discuss. When someone becomes used to your attention becomes part of their routine. Even if they don't fully appreciate it, even if they don't always acknowledge it, it becomes familiar, predictable, expected. Then one day, it's gone. Suddenly the good morning texts aren't there. The quick check-ins disappear. The emotional availability changes. And now there is a gap. Human beings notice gaps, especially when they were never expecting them. That gap often creates reflection. And reflection creates awareness. Awareness creates curiosity. Curiosity creates pursuit. Here's something many people misunderstand. The most attractive thing about not caring isn't the distance. It's the confidence. Because when someone sees that your happiness doesn't depend entirely on them, they see strength. When someone sees that your life continues, whether they text or not, they see independence. When someone sees that you can enjoy your day without constant validation, they see value. Not because you're pretending, but because you're genuinely living your life. And genuine confidence always attracts attention. Before, your energy might have looked like this. What should I text? Why hasn't he replied? Did I say something wrong? Maybe I should message again. Everything revolves around him. Everything revolves around the relationship. Everything revolves around getting reassurance. But then something changes. You start focusing on yourself again. Your goals, your friendships, your growth, your hobbies, your future. And suddenly, the relationship is no longer the center of your universe. It's simply one part of it. That shift is powerful. Because people are naturally drawn toward those who have their own direction. Let's have a brief story to easily understand this. Think about someone who spent months trying to keep a relationship alive. Every conversation started by them. Every plan suggested by them. Every problem solved by them. Then one day, they stopped. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge. Just exhaustion. And something unexpected happened. The other person finally reached out. Not because of a trick. Not because of manipulation. But because they finally felt the absence of what they had taken for granted. Sometimes people don't understand value while it's constantly available. Sometimes they understand it when they have to experience life without it. Not everyone comes back. And this is important to understand, because the goal of not caring is not making someone return. The goal is reclaiming yourself. Sometimes they come back, sometimes they don't. But either way, you win, because your peace is no longer controlled by another person's actions. And that freedom changes everything. When you stop trying to convince someone to choose you, you start choosing yourself. When you stop proving your worth, you start recognizing your worth. When you stop chasing attention, you start attracting respect. And respect is often more powerful than attention, because attention can be temporary. Respect lasts. The real power of not caring isn't that it makes someone miss you, it's that it helps you stop abandoning yourself. And once that happens, your energy changes, your confidence changes, your decisions change, and people notice. In part 3, we'll go even deeper into why people become obsessed with what they can no longer control, the psychology of emotional scarcity, why pulling your energy back often increases attraction, and the hidden reason some men suddenly return after losing access to you. Pause, because sometimes the moment you stop making someone your priority is the exact moment they realize how important you truly were. There is something interesting about human nature. Most people don't think about it until they experience it themselves. We often pay the most attention to what feels uncertain, not what is guaranteed, not what is constantly available, not what is always waiting, but what feels like it could slip away. This doesn't just apply to relationships. It applies to opportunities, friendships, dreams, even everyday things. The possibility of losing something often makes us see it differently. And that is exactly why the energy of not caring too much creates such a powerful shift. Because suddenly, the certainty disappears. And when certainty disappears, attention increases. When someone knows they can always reach you, when they know you'll always answer, when they know you'll always forgive, when they know you'll always stay, something dangerous can happen. Comfort turns into complacency. The relationship stops feeling like something that needs nurturing. It starts feeling automatic, almost guaranteed. And humans have a strange habit. We often appreciate things more when we realize they aren't guaranteed. Think about a movie you've watched 10 times. You already know what happens. You know every scene, every ending, every surprise. Compare that to a movie you've never seen before. Which one captures more attention? The unknown one. Because uncertainty naturally creates curiosity, and curiosity creates focus. The same thing happens in relationships. When someone already knows exactly what you'll do every single time, their curiosity begins to fade. But when your energy changes, curiosity wakes up again. Not because you're playing games, but because the pattern changed, and people notice changed patterns. Let's talk about something many people misunderstand. Scarcity is not about becoming unavailable. It is about becoming selective. There is a difference. Unavailable says, you can't have access. Selective says, my intention has value. One comes from ego, the other comes from self-respect, and people can feel the difference. When you stop giving unlimited access to your emotions, your attention becomes more meaningful, your presence becomes more appreciated, your time becomes more valuable, because now it isn't being handed out endlessly. This is where many people get surprised. After you've stopped over-investing, he suddenly notices things he ignored before. Your kindness, your consistency, your support, your loyalty, your energy, the conversations, the attention, the effort, things that once felt normal suddenly become visible. Why? Because absence creates contrast, and contrast creates awareness. Many people never realize what someone contributed until that contribution disappears. Nobody plans to take people for granted, at least most don't. It happens gradually. A little appreciation disappears here, a little effort disappears there, and eventually, someone who once felt deeply valued begins feeling overlooked. This is one reason why stepping back becomes so powerful. Not because you're punishing someone, but because you're allowing reality to become visible. You're allowing them to experience life without the benefits they stopped noticing. And that experience often creates perspective. One of the biggest transformations happens inside you. Before, your mood may have depended on his attention. A text could make your day. A delayed response could ruin it. A compliment could lift you up. A cold reply could bring you down. That's exhausting, because your emotional state becomes controlled by someone else's behavior. But when you stop caring excessively, you take that power back. You stop handing your emotional well-being to another person, and that creates a confidence people can feel. Not because you're trying to impress anyone,
but because you're finally standing on your own foundation. Confidence isn't loud. It isn't arrogant. It doesn't demand attention. Real confidence is quiet. It's the ability to enjoy your life without needing constant reassurance. It's knowing your value even when nobody is reminding you. It's being okay whether someone stays or leaves. That kind of confidence is rare, and rare things naturally attract attention. Because most people spend their lives chasing approval. Very few people learn how to create it from within. At some point, many people have a realization. They notice you're no longer reacting the same way. You're no longer chasing explanations. You're no longer trying to force outcomes. You're no longer begging for clarity. And suddenly, they see a version of you they haven't seen before. A calmer version, a stronger version, a more independent version. And that version often creates more attraction than all the effort you were giving before. Because strength is attractive. Peace is attractive. Self-respect is attractive. Now let's clear up a misconception. The goal isn't to make someone obsessed. Healthy relationships are not built on obsession. They're built on appreciation, mutual effort, respect, trust. However, when someone loses access to something they valued, their focus often increases. They think about it more. They notice it more. They remember it more. That's not magic. That's human psychology. And it's one reason people often return after losing someone. Not because the person changed overnight, but because they finally experienced the absence. There are countless stories of people saying, "I didn't realize how much they meant to me until they were gone." You've probably heard that before. Maybe you've even lived it. Why does it happen? Because familiarity can hide value, and distance can reveal it. That's why constantly proving your worth rarely works. People don't fully understand your value because you explain it. They understand it because they experience it. One of the biggest mistakes people make is spending years trying to convince someone to appreciate them, trying to convince someone to care, trying to convince someone to see their worth. But real change happens when you stop convincing and start becoming stronger, becoming happier, becoming more fulfilled, becoming more focused. Because the more complete your life becomes, the less dependent you become on anyone else's validation. And ironically, that is often when people start noticing your value most. The power of not caring isn't about making someone suffer. It's about removing your need to control the outcome. It's about trusting yourself enough to let people choose. And if they don't choose you, trusting yourself enough to keep moving forward anyway. Because the strongest position you can ever be in is this: you appreciate someone's presence, but you do not depend on it. And when you reach that place, everything changes. There is a huge misunderstanding that keeps many people trapped. They believe that if they stop trying so hard, they are giving up. If they stop chasing, they are losing. If they stop fighting for the connection, they are admitting defeat. But that's not true. Not even close. Because there is a massive difference between giving up and letting go. Giving up comes from hopelessness. Letting go comes from strength. Giving up says, "I don't believe anything can improve." Letting go says, "I refuse to force what isn't being given freely." And understanding that difference changes everything. Think about this honestly. Have you ever successfully forced someone to care? Have you ever convinced someone to value you through endless explanations? Have you ever argued someone into appreciating you? Probably not. Because genuine feelings don't grow through pressure. They grow through choice. Real affection is chosen. Real respect is chosen. Real effort is chosen. The moment someone feels pressured into giving those things, they become less meaningful. That is why constantly pushing rarely works. People value what they choose, not what they are forced into. Many people fall into this pattern. They explain, then explain again, then explain differently, then explain one more time. They keep hoping that if they just find the perfect words, everything will finally make sense. Everything will finally change. But often the issue isn't understanding. The issue is willingness. Someone who wants to understand you will usually try. Someone who wants to hear you will usually listen. Someone who values you will usually make space for your feelings. And no amount of explaining can replace willingness. Let's talk about something important. People often confuse emotional detachment with emotional coldness. They are not the same thing. Coldness says, "I don't care about anyone." Detachment says, "I care, but I won't lose myself." That's a huge difference. Healthy detachment means your happiness exists whether someone texts you or not. Healthy detachment means you can love someone without making them responsible for your entire emotional world. Healthy detachment means you have a life beyond the relationship, and that energy is incredibly attractive because it feels stable, grounded, confident. Most people expect emotional extremes. They expect panic, begging, overreaction, constant pursuit. When someone suddenly becomes emotionally steady, it stands out. Instead of chasing answers, they remain calm. Instead of demanding reassurance, they trust themselves. Instead of desperately holding on, they stay centered. And that stability often creates more attraction than emotional intensity ever could, because stability feels safe, and safety creates trust. There is an interesting psychological principle. When something feels permanently available, urgency disappears. But when access becomes uncertain, attention often increases. This doesn't mean you should deliberately create distance. It means natural distance reveals truth. When you stop over-pursuing, the other person finally has room to decide what they actually want. Sometimes they move closer. Sometimes they move away. But either way, you finally get clarity. And clarity is far more valuable than false hope. Many people try to pretend they don't care, but pretending is exhausting, because deep down, they still care desperately. They're simply hiding it. And people often sense the difference. Real confidence doesn't come from acting uninterested. It comes from genuinely trusting yourself, trusting that you'll be okay, trusting that your value remains intact, trusting that someone else's choices do not determine your worth. That confidence cannot be faked. It comes from growth, from healing, from experience.